The sun was sinking low over the Arizona horizon, casting long, blood-orange shadows across the dry land. Dust swirled behind a lone rider as he made his way up the ridge, his silhouette cut against the fading sky like a knife. His name was Jack Callahan, a drifter. Some said outlaw, others called him a man running from something. But he rode with the calm of a man who'd faced death and tipped his hat to it. Jack wasn't looking for trouble when he came across the tracks. Barefoot, small, fresh, he dismounted and crouched down, brushing his gloved fingers across the dirt. "Kid," he muttered. "Real recent, PA." The trail led off into a narrow canyon, the kind that turned men into bones if they wandered too long. But something about the prints struck him, too small for a settler, and too clean for a wild child. It wasn't Apache territory, but folks still told stories of spirits in the rocks and children who vanished without a trace. Jack wasn't the type to play hero, but something in his gut, maybe it was the war he'd fought in, or maybe the girl he'd lost back in Kansas, wouldn't let him ride on. He followed the tracks. It wasn't long before he found her. She was no older than 7, curled up under a twisted mesquite tree, her skin the color of the red earth around her. Her black hair was matted and full of dust, her eyes wide with a fear that ran deeper than words. She clutched a small bundle of cloth to her chest. Jack knelt. "Hey now," he said softly, "ain't gonna hurt you." She didn't move, didn't speak. "You got a name, little one?" Silence. He removed his hat slowly, letting her see his face lined, weathered, honest in its way. The girl's eyes darted to the horse behind him, then back to him. "You out here alone?" he asked. She finally spoke, voice cracked and small. "Mama told me to run." Jack's chest tightened. "Why'd she tell you that?" The girl looked away. Men came. Jack had seen enough to fill in the rest. He took her hand, tiny, cold, trembling, and helped her onto his horse. "We'll get you safe," he told her. He didn't know then that saving her would change everything. By nightfall, Jack had set up camp under a bluff, the fire low, the stars bright as diamonds. The girl, still too shaken to say much, sat wrapped in his duster, sipping water from his canteen. "What's your name?" he asked again. She hesitated, then whispered, "Tala." "A pretty name," Jack said. "Means something, don't it?" She nodded. "Wolf." He smiled. "Fitting." That night, as coyotes howled and the desert wind whispered through the rocks, Jack kept watch with one hand on his rifle. He didn't know who the men were that came for Tala and her mother, but he had a feeling they'd come looking again. And if they did, well, they'd find Jack Callahan waiting. The sun had barely risen when Jack packed up camp. The weight of Tala beside him, heavier than the saddlebag slung across his horse. Her small fingers gripped the reins nervously, eyes scanning the rocky horizon for signs of danger. The desert was quiet, but Jack knew better. Quiet was just the calm before the storm. They followed the winding trail down from the canyon into a valley rimmed by jagged cliffs. Here the air was cooler, shaded by tall pines that whispered ancient secrets. Jack felt it in his bones. They were close. He hadn't asked Tala much about her mother yet, sensing the pain was too raw. But now, as the trees thickened and the sound of running water reached their ears, the girl's posture shifted. Hope flickered in her dark eyes. "We're near," Tala said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, scanning the brush for signs of life. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a twig echoed from the trees. Both turned, hands reaching for weapons. Jack's hand closed on his Colt. Tala's, small fingers trembling. From the shadows emerged a woman tall and proud, her skin the same rich hue as Tala's, her dark hair streaked with silver. Her eyes held the fierce fire of a warrior, tempered by sorrow. "Tala," the woman breathed, rushing forward. "Child." The girl ran to her, collapsing into her mother's arms. The woman's grip was fierce, desperate, as if afraid she'd lose her again. Jack watched quietly, feeling the weight of a story he was only beginning to understand. "My name's Ayana," the woman said, turning to Jack. "You found her." Jack tipped his hat. "Name's Callahan." She was alone, scared. Ayana's eyes searched his face, then softened. "Thank you." They moved to the edge of the clearing, where a small cabin stood, half hidden by the trees. It was modest, but sturdy, a home carved out of the wilderness. Inside, Jack noticed the walls were decorated with woven blankets and beadwork, the scent of sage and earth filling the air. Ayana poured water into a cup for Tala, who drank eagerly. "You saved her life," Ayana said quietly. "Those men, they're after me." Jack's brow furrowed. "Why?" Ayana hesitated, then spoke with the weight of truth. "I was married to a white rancher, a man with enemies. When he died, I inherited his land. But there are those who want to take it by force. Men who don't see me as a widow, but as a threat." Jack understood then. This was no ordinary rescue. Tala was the last piece of a fight that was just beginning. "I'll help you," he said, the decision settling in his gut. Ayana nodded. "We have no choice." That night, as the fire crackled and the stars wheeled overhead, Jack sat with Ayana and Tala, sharing stories and silence. The desert was a harsh place, but out here, under the wide sky, a new family was being forged. And the fight for survival had only just begun. The morning sun was harsh and unforgiving, beating down on the rugged landscape like a relentless hammer. Jack Callahan stood outside the cabin, eyes narrowed as he scanned the distant ridges. The quiet in the valley was deceiving. He knew the men hunting Ayana and Tala were still out there. Somewhere in the desert wasteland. Ayana emerged from the cabin, her face set with determination. "They won't stop," she said, voice steady despite the fear Jack sensed underneath. "They want the land. They want to erase us." Jack nodded slowly. "I'll be damned if I let that happen." The truth of the West was written in blood and fire, and this fight was no different. Jack spent the morning teaching Tala how to handle the weight of a rifle, his rough hands guiding hers with patience. The girl was quick, her dark eyes focused, soaking up every lesson. Ayana watched silently, the tension in her jaw easing as she saw her daughter find strength. But no lesson could prepare them for what came. Next, a distant shout echoed through the valley, rough voices carrying across the dry air. "They're here," Ayana said, hand tightening on Jack's arm. Jack grabbed his rifle and scanned the tree line. Out of the brush came a group of men, hard-eyed, dusty, and armed to the teeth. Their leader was a broad-shouldered man with a scar running down his cheek. The kind of man who looked like trouble wrapped in leather. "Callahan." The man spat. "You've been meddling where you don't belong." Jack squared his shoulders. "You've been chasing a woman and child through my land. That's where I belong." A tense silence stretched as the desert wind kicked up dust. Ayana stepped forward, fierce and unyielding. "Leave us be. The land belongs to my family." The leader laughed, cold and hard. "Family? This is the West. Family don't mean squat here." Gunmetal glinted in the sunlight as men raised rifles. Jack didn't hesitate. The first shot cracked through the air, setting off a furious exchange that tore through the valley like a thunderstorm. Tala ducked behind a fallen log, heart pounding, clutching the rifle Jack had given her. She fired once, then again, a wild but determined mark. Smoke and dust clouded the air. When the gunfire died down, 2 men lay still on the ground, the rest scrambling back into the trees. Jack lowered his rifle, breathing hard. "This ain't over," he said grimly. Ayana wiped sweat from her brow. "No, it's just begun." That night, under a sky smeared with stars, the small group tended wounds and shared a quiet resolve. The enemy was close, but so was their will to survive. Jack looked at Tala, her face set with a courage that surprised even him. "You're stronger than you know, Wolf." She smiled faintly. "I learned from my mother." And as the desert wind sang its haunting song, the fight for the land and for family pressed on. The early morning light spilled across the mesa like liquid gold, but it did little to warm the cold fear that settled over Jack Callahan and his small band. They were no longer just protecting a lost girl and her mother, they were guardians of a legacy under siege. Jack rode ahead, scanning the horizon where the dry grass bent beneath the light breeze. Ayana rode close behind, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Tala stayed near the center of their small group, her hands steady on the reins despite the weight of the past days. "We need to move," Jack said, voice low but urgent. "They're circling us." Ayana nodded. "The land is sacred. I won't leave it." Jack respected that stubbornness, that fierce love, but he knew better than to underestimate their enemies. The first signs of trouble came just past the noon hour. Gunfire cracked like thunder across the open plain. Jack dropped from his horse, rolling behind a large boulder as bullets whipped past. The men who'd been chasing them weren't just after land anymore, they were intent on wiping out anyone who stood in their way. Ayana fired back from cover, her shots precise and unforgiving. Tala crouched low, her rifle shaking in her hands as she took aim. The mesa turned into a battlefield, dust kicked up by galloping horses, the sharp smell of gunpowder hanging thick in the air. Jack caught sight of the scarred leader rallying his men, shouting orders to surround them. The odds were against them, but Jack's mind raced. This was no longer just about survival, it was about justice, about standing tall when the world wanted to see them fall. The fight dragged on for hours, the sun moving toward the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of blood red. At one point, Tala took a hit in the leg, a sharp burning pain that made her gasp. Jack was by her side in an instant, his rough hands pressing cloth to the wound. "Stay with me, Wolf," he said fiercely. "You're not done yet." Ayanna moved to cover, her face set in grim determination. The fire in her eyes never faltered, even as the battle took its toll. Finally, the attackers retreated, dragging their wounded with them. Silence settled over the mesa like a heavy blanket. Jack looked around at the battered group. "We held," Ayanna nodded, tears streaking down her dust-caked face. "But the price was high." Tala rested her head against Jack's shoulder, the pain making her breath shallow but her spirit unbroken. "That land's worth fighting for," Jack said quietly, "and so are the people who call it home." As the sun dipped below the distant mountains, casting the world into twilight, the small family made camp again, their bond forged not just by blood, but by fire. They knew the fight wasn't over, but they'd face it together. The desert night was alive with sounds, the soft rustle of sagebrush, the distant howl of coyotes, and the ever-present whisper of the wind weaving through the canyon walls. But beneath the natural chorus lay something more attention, a quiet warning. Jack sat by the dying embers of the campfire, his rifle resting against a nearby rock. His eyes were sharp and restless, scanning the shadows between the trees. Ayanna sat close, her fingers working the leather of her saddle, her mind clearly elsewhere. Tala, still limping but determined, lay wrapped in a blanket, eyes half closed but alert. "There's something wrong," Jack muttered, voice low. Ayanna nodded slowly. "The men, they didn't come here just to take land or settle a score. They want to scare us away. They're waiting for the right moment." Jack frowned, his mind racing through possibilities. "We can't stay in one place too long. They'll find us if we're careless." Ayanna's face hardened. "This land is our home. We can't run forever." A distant crack like a twig snapping broke the night's stillness. Jack's hand went to his rifle as he stood, signaling the others to stay silent. A figure emerged from the shadows, hands raised in peace. It was an old Apache man, weathered and lean, with eyes that held the wisdom of generations. "I bring a warning," he said quietly, voice rough as the desert stone. "The enemy grows bolder. They've hired more men. They will come soon, and they will not show mercy." Jack motioned for him to sit by the fire. "Who sent you?" "The elders," the man replied. "They know your fight is just." Ayanna's eyes glistened with a mix of hope and sorrow. "Then we have allies, after all." The old man nodded. "But time is short. The land remembers its children, but even the strongest must be ready." As the night deepened, Jack, Ayanna and Tala listened to tales of Apache courage, of battles won and lost, and of the sacred bond between people and earth. For the first time since their flight began, they felt a flicker of strength beyond their own, a reminder that they were part of something greater. When dawn broke, the camp was packed, horses saddled. The fight ahead was uncertain, but the bond between them was ironclad. Jack looked at Tala, her eyes fierce despite her injury. "Ready, Wolf?" She smiled, a glint of wild determination shining through. "Always." With the wind at their backs and the memory of the past guiding their path, they rode toward the coming storm together. The dawn was bitter cold, the sky painted with pale streaks of pink and gray as Jack Callahan, Ayanna, and Tala rode hard toward the high bluff overlooking the valley. The mesa below was quiet, but Jack's gut told him it was the calm before the storm. The men chasing them had grown reckless, and now they were coming for a final reckoning. Jack checked his rifle one last time, the cold metal biting into his calloused hands. Tala sat stiffly in the saddle beside him, her leg bandaged tight but her eyes fierce. Ayanna rode behind them, her face a mask of determination and quiet sorrow. "This is where we make our stand," Jack said, voice low and steady. "They want the land, but they won't get it without paying the price." The trio dismounted behind a craggy outcrop overlooking the valley, making their preparations with practiced precision. Jack set up a makeshift barricade from rocks and fallen branches, while Ayanna and Tala readied their rifles. As the sun climbed, a cloud of dust appeared on the distant trail, the enemy's approach unmistakable. Rough men on horseback, shouting challenges and brandishing weapons, their leader's scarred face twisted in rage. Jack took a deep breath. "Hold your fire until they're close. We want them to feel the full weight of what they're walking into." The men charged, a thunderous roar across the valley. Jack, Ayanna and Tala waited in silence, hearts pounding. When the attackers were just yards away, the first shots rang out. The battle was brutal and swift. Bullets tore through the dry air, horses reared and screamed, and men fell on both sides. Jack moved like a ghost through the chaos, his rifle never missing its mark. Ayanna fought with the fury of a mother protecting her bloodline, each shot a testament to her love and strength. Tala, despite her injury, held her ground, firing with a focus that belied her youth, but the enemy was relentless, pressing forward with savage determination. At one point, Jack found himself face to face with the scarred leader. Their eyes locking in a moment charged with hate and desperation. "You should have stayed out of this," the man growled, raising his revolver. Jack's response was swift, a crack echoed, and the man fell, blood pooling on the earth. With their leader down, the attackers faltered, and soon the remaining men fled, their threat broken. The valley fell silent once more. Jack looked around at the battered group, their breaths ragged but victorious. "We held the line," he said, voice heavy with relief. Ayanna approached, her eyes shining with tears and gratitude. "We owe you everything." Jack shook his head. "No. You owe it to yourselves, to Tala, to this land." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with fire, Jack knew their fight was far from over. But in this moment, they had claimed victory, not just for themselves, but for the future of a people who refused to be erased. The first light of morning stretched gently across the valley, painting the desert with soft hues of gold and amber. The battle was over, and a fragile peace settled over the land. Jack Callahan stood beside the cabin, watching Tala and Ayanna tend to the small garden that was beginning to take root. The past weeks had changed them all. Jack, once a lone rider drifting through the West, now felt a tie to this place, to the people who had welcomed him into their world. Ayanna looked up from the earth, her hands dirt-streaked but steady. "The land is healing," she said softly, "just like we are." Tala smiled, her leg no longer stiff, her eyes bright with promise. "We're safe now." Jack nodded, feeling a rare warmth in his chest. "You fought hard for this, for your home." Ayanna met his gaze, gratitude and something deeper shining in her eyes. "You saved us, Jack, but it's more than that. You became family." Jack tipped his hat, the corners of his mouth lifting in a rare smile. "Families, would you make it out here?" The days that followed were filled with rebuilding and quiet moments, the tending of wounds, the planting of seeds, and stories shared around the fire. Tala grew stronger, learning not just how to survive, but how to thrive. And Jack, he found a place to call home, no longer running from shadows but standing firm in the light of a new dawn. The land stretched wide and wild before them, a place of hardship, yes, but also of beauty and hope. Together, they faced the future, a cowboy, a widow, a girl named Tala the Wolf, bound by blood, by land, and by the fierce will to endure.